Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive into one of the most famous relationship books
Yeah.
like ever?
Oh, for sure.
We're talking Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus by John Gray,
Yep.
trying to help you really get it without having to read the whole thing.
Yeah.
So imagine this. Men and women are actually from different planets,
Okay.
each with totally different ways of thinking and feeling and talking.
Right. I mean, that's like the whole point of the book, right?
Yeah. It's this super simple idea that explains why sometimes it feels like we're speaking different languages.
Exactly. John Gray says men and women just have like fundamentally different needs, and their communication styles are totally different. And that obviously can lead to some misunderstandings.
For sure. Okay, so let's break this down a bit further.
Sure.
Men are from Mars.
Right.
Mars is all about solutions, like getting things done.
Yep.
And women are from Venus.
Uh-huh.
Venus is about emotions and connection. So what are some of the biggest differences that Gray talks about between these, Martians and Venusians?
Well, one that always sticks out to me is how men, in their Martian way, they kind of retreat into their caves when they get stressed.
Oh, yeah.
They go quiet, they pull back, they try to solve their problems on their own.
I can see how that would be super confusing for women who, are from Venus and see that as not caring or something.
Exactly. It's not that they don't care. It's that they process emotions in this totally different way,
Okay.
It's like this ancient Martian survival instinct, almost. They
Yeah.
need that alone time to recharge and figure things out.
So how should women, deal with this whole cave dwelling thing? Should they just wait it out?
Well, Gray suggests giving men the space they need without, taking it personally. It's crucial to remember it's not about you.
Right.
It's just their way of coping, and they will come back.
Okay. That's
Yeah.
reassuring. But does that mean women just have to put up with this behavior and not get their own needs met?
Not at all. It's about understanding, what's driving the behavior and then communicating your needs really clearly.
Got it.
Gray talks a lot about something called assertive asking, which we can dive into later.
Okay. So while the guys are off in their caves, what are the Venusians up to?
Well, women being from Venus, they thrive on connection and expressing their feelings. They're like waves ebbing and flowing with their emotions. And when they talk about problems, it's not always about finding solutions,
Right.
It's more about just processing those emotions and feeling close to someone.
Oh, that totally explains why sometimes I just want to vent and not necessarily hear a solution.
Exactly.
My partner, though, always jumps into Mr. Fix-It mode.
Oh, yeah. Gray is this perfect example of that. Tom comes home and Mary's exhausted.
Okay.
But instead of just listening to her, he starts suggesting she quit her job.
Not exactly what she needed to hear, right?
Right. It's like they're speaking completely different languages.
They are.
And Gray actually has this funny Venusian-Martian phrase dictionary in the book to show just how big those communication gaps can be.
Oh, really?
Like when a woman says, "we never go out,"
Uh-huh.
she's not stating a fact,
Okay.
She's actually expressing a desire for more connection.
It's like a coded message.
It is. And in that case, the message is actually, "I want to do something fun with you. Would you take me out?" It's a request for quality time, not a critique of their social life.
Okay, wow. I'm already seeing how understanding these little nuances
Yeah,
could prevent a lot of arguments.
for sure.
So how can we learn to speak each other's language, more effectively?
Well, Gray suggests a few different techniques, but one that I really like is the love letter technique.
Yeah?
It's this powerful way to express your feelings clearly and help your partner really understand where you're coming from.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this love letter technique. How does it actually work?
It's pretty simple. You write down your feelings as if you're sending a letter to your partner. The key is to focus on expressing those emotions honestly,
Right.
not blaming or criticizing.
So instead of saying, you always make me feel, it's more like, when you do this, I feel.
Exactly. You're taking ownership of your own feelings
Uh-huh.
and expressing them in a way that invites understanding,
Yeah.
not defensiveness.
That makes so much sense. I can already see how that would be way more effective than just blurting things out in the heat of the moment.
Yeah, and there's another really interesting twist to this technique.
Oh, I'm all ears.
Gray wants you to write a second letter. This time, you're pretending to be your partner responding to your first letter.
Whoa, so you're stepping into their shoes and seeing things from their point of view.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
a powerful way to build empathy and understanding, which
Yeah.
are essential for any healthy relationship.
Okay, I can definitely see the value in that. Seems like a great way to avoid those communication breakdowns that can lead to, bigger problems down the line.
Totally. And that brings us to another crucial point Gray makes. Men and women keep score differently in relationships, which can be a huge source of conflict.
Oh, okay. Tell me more about this scoring system.
Well, men, being from Mars, they focus on those grand gestures.
Okay.
You know, the big displays of affection, working hard to provide financial security.
Right. So it's like the classic, I bought you a diamond necklace, so why aren't you happy scenario.
Exactly. But women from Venus, they value those small, consistent acts of love. It's the everyday gestures, the listening ear, the helping hand
Oh,
that really make them feel loved.
so it's less about the fireworks and more about the steady glow.
Yes. It's the difference between a meteor shower that happens once a year and the moon that's there every night.
Ooh, I love that analogy.
Both are beautiful, but they serve different purposes.
So the guys are going for the big win, and women are appreciating the consistent effort.
Yeah, and that's where the clash can happen.
Right.
You know, men might feel like they're doing so much, while women are left feeling unappreciated because those little things are missing.
I think a lot of couples can probably relate to that. I know I've been on both sides of that equation. So what's the solution? How can we bridge this scoring gap?
Well, it all comes down to understanding what makes your partner feel loved and making an effort to speak their love language, so to speak. For women, it might be those small gestures of affection, like flowers or compliments or just listening attentively.
And for men, it's about appreciating those gestures and understanding that they carry more weight than we might realize.
Exactly.
It's about shifting our focus from the grand to the consistent.
Yes. It's not that men shouldn't make those grand gestures, but they're not the only way to score points. And this leads us to another big point Gray makes. Giving the right kind of love.
Okay, I'm sensing things are about to get even deeper here. What does he mean by giving the right kind of love?
He says men mainly need things like trust and acceptance and appreciation, while women need caring and understanding and respect. The problem is we often give the love that we want instead of what our partner actually needs.
That's such a huge insight. I can see how that would lead to a lot of frustration and miscommunication in relationships.
Totally.
Can you give me an example of how this plays out in, like, real life?
Sure. Imagine a guy named Jim who feels smothered by his partner, Lisa's, constant caring.
Oh, wait.
He needs space and autonomy.
Right.
But Lisa wants to show him love, so she keeps showering him with attention. Now, Lisa feels unloved when Jim pulls away, not realizing that's just his way of coping.
So they're both trying to show love, but it's backfiring because they're not speaking the same language.
Exactly. And that's why understanding these inherent differences is so important.
Right.
It's about giving each other the space and support we need in the way that actually works for us.
This is all making so much sense. It's like I'm finally getting a glimpse behind the curtain of those classic relationship arguments.
And this is just the beginning. There's so much more to unpack in this Martian-Venusian world.
Okay, I'm ready for more. Let's dive into the next layer of this relationship puzzle.
Sounds good. Welcome back to our deep dive into Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus.
You know, it's funny, even though this book has been around for a while, it's amazing how relevant it still is. You know?
Totally.
Like, I feel like John Gray really tapped into some, like, fundamental truths about men and women.
Absolutely. And one of the most, I guess, eye-opening things for me was this idea of waves.
Right.
How it connects to women's emotional cycles.
Okay, I need a little more on that. What does he mean by women being like waves?
He's talking about those natural ups and downs in women's moods and energy levels, just like the ocean, right?
Yeah.
Women experience these, high tides and low tides, times when they're feeling super happy and energetic, and then times when they might feel more withdrawn or overwhelmed.
Oh, yeah, I can totally relate to that. But how does this wave thing actually play out in relationships?
Well, it can create a lot of confusion for men, who don't always understand these natural ebbs and flows. They might try to fix a woman's bad mood when really she just needs to kind of ride the wave and process her emotions.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've definitely been in situations where I just needed to, like, feel my feelings, but my partner kept trying to offer solutions.
Right.
Which just made me more frustrated.
Exactly. Gray uses this example of Bill trying to cheer up Pam when she's down.
Go.
Bill, being from Mars, he wants to find a solution, right?
Yeah.
But Pam, from Venus, she needs to actually experience those emotions fully before she can move on.
So what's the best way for men to support their partners during those, like, low tide times?
Gray suggests just being present, listening without judgment, offering reassurance. It's about acknowledging her feelings and letting her know it's okay to feel whatever she's feeling.
So more about empathy than problem solving.
Exactly. Holding space for her emotions rather than trying to control them.
I like that. And this kind of reminds me of something you mentioned earlier, accepting the seasons of love.
Oh, right.
It's about those natural cycles in relationships. Yeah.
Yes. Gray really emphasizes that it's totally normal for love to have its ups and downs.
Yeah.
There will be those periods of intense connection, and then there will be times when you feel a bit more distant or you have to put in more effort.
I think that's such a reassuring concept, especially in a world where we're constantly bombarded with these images of perfect relationships.
Right. It's easy to think that if love isn't always easy and blissful, then something's wrong.
Totally.
But Gray reminds us that, relationships have seasons, just like nature does.
So instead of freaking out when those, more challenging seasons arrive, we can see them as a chance for growth.
Exactly. Even those tough times serve a purpose.
Okay.
They can help us understand each other better and come out even stronger on the other side.
That's a really empowering way to look at it. It takes the pressure off having to be perfect all the time.
Right. And Gray actually gives some practical advice on how to handle those different seasons. Like during times when you're feeling more distant, it's important to remember that your partner still loves you.
So it's about trusting the foundation of the relationship, even when things feel shaky.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's also about using those times apart to focus on personal growth.
That's a good point. So we can come back to the relationship feeling more, refreshed and recharged.
Right. Which brings us to another important concept Gray talks about. Understanding our partner's emotional needs. He says unmet needs are often at the heart of relationship problems.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do we even know what our partner's emotional needs are?
Well, Gray gives us a framework for understanding those needs. He says men, they primarily need things like trust and acceptance, appreciation, admiration, approval, and encouragement.
Got it. And what about women? What are their main emotional needs?
Gray says women need things like caring, understanding, respect, devotion, validation, reassurance.
Wow, that's quite a list.
Yeah.
But how can we tell if our partner's needs are actually being met?
Well, Gray says pay attention to their behavior.
Oh, yeah.
If they're always complaining or criticizing or withdrawing,
Right.
it could be a sign that something's missing.
So it's not just about taking their words at face value. It's about looking deeper.
Yes. It's about trying to understand the reasons behind their behavior.
Okay.
And that's where the whole Martian Venusian perspective can be so helpful.
Right.
It helps us see things from our partner's point of view, instead of just making assumptions.
I like that. So let's say we figured out what our partner's emotional needs are. What's next? How do we actually meet those needs?
Well, Gray says it's not always about, grand gestures or huge efforts. Sometimes those small, everyday acts of love can make a big difference.
Can you give me some examples of those small acts of love that might speak to those needs?
Sure. For men, it could be as simple as expressing appreciation for their hard work, acknowledging their strengths, or just really listening when they're sharing their thoughts and feelings.
And for women, it might be things like offering compliments, helping with chores around the house, or just being present and attentive when they need to talk.
Exactly. It's about those small gestures that show you're paying attention and that you care.
I love how Gray breaks down these seemingly complicated relationship dynamics into such simple steps.
Yeah.
It's like he's giving us a roadmap for this whole Martian Venusian territory.
That's exactly what makes this book so popular. It's not just about understanding the differences. It's about giving us the tools to actually bridge those differences and build stronger relationships.
Speaking of tools, Gray also talks about how to ask for what we need in a way that our partner can actually understand and respond to.
Ah, yes. Assertive asking.
Okay, tell me more about assertive asking. What are the main principles?
Well, Gray says it's super important to be clear and direct and specific in our requests. It's about saying what we want without beating around the bush.
So instead of saying, it would be nice if you helped out more around the house,
Right.
It's more like, Would you please unload the dishwasher after dinner?
Exactly. Being assertive, but not aggressive.
Got it.
Owning our needs and expressing them in a way that invites our partner to participate.
That's an important distinction. It's about collaboration, not control.
Exactly. And Gray gives some great tips on how to phrase our requests,
Okay.
depending on whether we're talking to a Martian or a Venusian.
Okay, I'm curious. How can we tailor those requests to our partner's specific communication style?
Well, when you're making requests of men, Gray says it's super important to avoid vague language or emotional appeals.
So, no more. Could you maybe possibly think about it helping out sometime soon?
Nope. Men respond best to clear, concise requests that respect their autonomy and problem-solving skills.
So more like, hey, I'm feeling overwhelmed with the housework. Would you be willing to handle the yard work this weekend?
Exactly. It's a direct request, gives him a specific task, and acknowledges his ability to contribute.
Okay.
Now, with women, it's important to validate their feelings and acknowledge their efforts.
So it's not just about stating our needs. It's about creating a context of appreciation and understanding.
Yes. Women need to feel heard and understood before they can fully engage with a request.
This whole assertive asking thing is so smart because it really addresses those core communication differences between men and women. It's like a universal translator for relationships.
It is, and the best part is, anyone can learn to do it. Just takes practice and awareness.
And speaking of awareness, Gray also talks about how our past experiences, especially those from childhood, can actually affect our relationships in the present.
Yes, this is where things get really deep. Gray says that unresolved emotional wounds, those experiences of rejection or abandonment or criticism that we might have experienced earlier in life, they can pop up in our adult relationships and cause all sorts of problems.
So it's like we're carrying around this invisible baggage.
Yeah, and it can sabotage our relationships without us even realizing it.
That's kind of scary.
It is. Gray calls this the 90-10 principle.
Oh, okay.
He says 90% of our emotional reactions are actually rooted in the past, and only 10% are really about what's happening right now.
Wow, that's a pretty crazy statistic. It makes you realize how much of our behavior is driven by subconscious stuff.
Right, and that's why Gray encourages us to really explore our own emotional baggage and understand how it might be affecting our relationships.
So it's about taking responsibility for those old wounds and not blaming our partner for them.
Exactly. We can't change the past,
Right.
but we can change how it affects us now.
That's a powerful message. It means we have the power to break free from those old patterns and create healthier, more fulfilling relationships.
Totally. And that leads us to another interesting concept, the delayed reaction response, which can be really confusing in relationships.
Okay. What's the delayed reaction response?
It's when you experience a strong emotional reaction to something that happened in the past,
Okay.
but that reaction doesn't come up until much later.
Okay.
Maybe you suppressed your anger or disappointment at the time, thinking you were being nice or understanding.
Right. But those feelings don't just disappear, do they?
No, they don't. They kind of fester under the surface until they eventually erupt, often in a way that seems totally out of proportion to what's happening in the present.
Oh, I've totally been there. It's like when you snap at your partner for something small, but it's really about all this other stuff that's been building up.
Exactly. And that's why Gray says it's important to be honest with ourselves about our feelings and communicate them clearly in the moment, even if it feels uncomfortable.
So better to address those tough emotions head on rather than letting them explode later.
Yes. Avoiding conflict in the short term can actually lead to bigger problems down the line.
That makes sense. It's about using healthy communication to prevent those emotional landmines from going off later.
Right. And speaking of emotional landmines, Gray also talks about how men and women typically cope with emotional pain differently, which can cause a lot of misunderstandings.
Okay, I'm curious about this one. How do men and women differ in their coping mechanisms?
Well, Gray says that men often use things like indifference or discouragement or even anger to avoid dealing with deeper emotions like hurt or fear or inadequacy.
So it's like they're building walls to protect themselves.
Exactly. It's a way of staying in control and appearing strong, even when they're hurting inside. And women, they might use confusion or feeling bad or uncertainty as ways to shield themselves from anger or frustration or embarrassment.
It's like they're trying to avoid those emotions that might be seen as unfeminine or too much.
Right. It's a way of keeping the peace, even if it means suppressing their own needs.
I can see how those different coping mechanisms would create tension in a relationship.
Absolutely. A man's withdrawal might be his way of protecting himself from feeling hurt,
Yeah.
while a woman's confusion could be her way of avoiding expressing anger.
And neither of them is really communicating what they need or understanding the other person's point of view.
Exactly. That's why it's so crucial to be aware of our own coping mechanisms and
Yeah.
how they might be affecting our relationships.
So it's about taking responsibility for our own emotional patterns and learning to communicate more effectively.
Yes. And it's also about having compassion for our partner,
Hmm.
understanding that their coping mechanisms, even if they're frustrating, are often a way of protecting themselves from pain.
That's a really good point. It's about realizing that we all have our own ways of dealing with tough emotions,
Right.
and understanding those differences can lead to more empathy and connection.
Totally. And speaking of connection, Gray also has this fascinating perspective on how our need for security plays out in relationships.
Okay, I'm listening. How do those needs for security differ between, men and women?
Well, Gray says women often look for security through reassurance. They want to hear those words that confirm their partner's love and commitment.
So it's about feeling loved and cherished.
Exactly. Women need those verbal expressions of love to feel secure in the relationship.
Okay.
Men, on the other hand, they tend to feel more secure through trust.
Mm.
They want to feel like their partner believes in them and their abilities.
So it's about feeling competent and respected.
Precisely. They need to feel that their partner trusts their judgment and capabilities.
I can see how that difference in how we look for security could cause misunderstandings.
Totally. For example, a woman might constantly ask for reassurance because she interprets her partner's silence as a lack of love.
Right, and a man might feel pressured by her neediness, not understanding why she doesn't just trust his feelings.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to understand these differences. If you find yourself always needing reassurance, maybe try to find ways to build your own inner sense of security, rather than always depending on your partner.
And if you're a guy, be aware of your partner's need for those words of affirmation that make her feel safe and loved.
Exactly. It's about meeting each other's needs in a way that feels supportive and respectful.
This is all so insightful. It's like I'm finally starting to understand the language of relationships.
And we're just scratching the surface. There's still so much more to explore in this Martian Venusian world.
Okay, I'm ready for more. Lead the way.
All right, let's do it.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I feel like I've already learned so much about how to actually deal with those tricky Martian Venusian things we've been talking about.
Yeah, it is amazing how much just understanding those basic differences between men and women can help us,
Yep.
But as we've been saying, knowledge is just the first step, right?
Right.
The real magic happens when we actually use these ideas in our relationships.
Okay, so true. So how do we take all this Martian Venusian wisdom and make it actually work for us?
Yeah.
Where do we even start?
Well, one of the most important things John Gray talks about is the importance of giving trust, especially to men. He says men really do well when they feel trusted, to handle things, to be the knight in shining armor, so to speak.
Makes sense. I mean, men are from Mars, the planet of action and problem solving, right?
Okay.
So they'd probably feel kind of stifled if their partner's always second guessing them or trying to control everything they do.
Exactly. It's like giving them a noose instead of a sword.
Oh.
Gray says that when we show confidence in their abilities, even when they mess up, we actually help them step up.
So it's about letting go of that need to control and instead just choosing to believe in them.
Yeah.
Kind of sounds like a leap of faith.
It is, but it's a leap worth taking, When men feel trusted, they're much more likely to become the partners that we want them to be.
Mm-hmm.
And this idea of trust, it also applies to how we handle those, inevitable disagreements that come up.
For sure. Conflict is going to happen in any relationship, right? It's unavoidable.
Exactly. It's how we deal with it that matters, whether it brings us closer or tears us apart. Gray has some great tips on how to argue constructively, like avoiding blame or personal attacks.
So instead of saying stuff like, you always do this or you never do that,
Right.
it's more about focusing on our own feelings and needs.
Yes. Use those I statements, not you statements. Instead of saying you never listen to me,
Right.
you could say, I feel unheard when I'm trying to share my feelings.
It's such a small change in the words we use, but I bet it makes a huge difference.
It really does. It's about taking responsibility for our own emotions and expressing them in a way that doesn't make the other person defensive.
Yeah. And Gray also talks about taking breaks when things get too heated, right?
That's a good one.
I know for me, if I'm super emotional, it's hard to, like, think straight or say what I really mean.
Right. So stepping away for a bit, giving yourself time to calm down, and then coming back to the conversation when you're both more level-headed can help a lot.
It's like hitting pause on the argument before it turns into something worse.
Yeah, exactly. And when you do come back, Gray says, focus on finding a solution that works for both of you.
It's not about, one person being right or wrong. It's about working together to find common ground.
Exactly. And that usually takes some forgiveness, too.
Yeah, forgiveness can be really hard, though, especially when you've been hurt. How do we learn to forgive, even when it feels impossible?
Well, Gray reminds us that forgiveness is actually a gift you give to yourself. It lets you let go of those negative feelings and opens up space for healing in your relationship.
It's like letting go of that heavy weight you've been carrying around.
Exactly. And that feeling of lightness is so important for a happy, loving relationship. And speaking of love, Gray reminds us that love isn't just a feeling, it's also an action.
Yeah, it's easy to think of love as this, magical feeling, but it takes work.
For sure. Love is a verb. It's a choice we make every day, even when we're tired or stressed or feeling disconnected.
So we got to keep making those, deposits in the relationship bank.
Exactly. And Gray gives some great tips on how to do that, like never stop dating, even after years of being together.
I love that. It's so easy to let life get in the way of romance. But those date nights, those little gestures, they matter.
They really do. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy either. Just making time for each other, showing appreciation, and having fun together.
Yeah. And he also encourages couples to try new things together, like, a dance class or a cooking class or just exploring a new part of town.
Right. Keeping things fresh and exciting prevents the relationship from getting boring.
Right. And I think it's also about finding that balance between being together and having your own space.
Totally. Even couples who are super compatible still need time apart to, recharge and focus on themselves. That's how you prevent resentment and bring your best self to the relationship.
And speaking of our best selves, Gray talks a lot about communication, right?
Oh, yeah. Communication is key. Open and honest communication is what helps us resolve conflicts, understand each other's needs, and really build intimacy. Gray encourages us to be active listeners, really pay attention not just to the words, but also to the body language and the emotions behind them.
It's about putting your own stuff aside and creating that safe space for your partner to be open and honest.
Exactly. And it's also about being aware of how you communicate. Like if you're a woman, maybe try being more direct with your needs instead of dropping hints.
And if you're a guy, pay attention to those underlying feelings behind the words.
Right. Because we all communicate differently, and understanding those differences is what helps bridge the gap.
One thing I really appreciate about Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus is that it's hopeful. It's not about blaming each other for being different. It's about seeing those differences as a way to connect more deeply.
Absolutely. It's not about judgment. It's about curiosity and compassion and a willingness to grow together.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dives. But this is just the beginning of your journey, really. We hope you'll pick up Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, and see what else you can discover.
Yeah, and remember, the real work starts when you take these ideas and actually use them in your own life. Pay attention to those Martian-Venusian dynamics in your relationship and see how understanding those differences can really change things for the better.
So go out there and explore those differences. Don't see them as obstacles. See them as opportunities for more understanding and love. Until next time, happy exploring.